What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Pilsners and Prelims UFC podcast. I'm Andy. That's Rick. Might have pointed to the wrong side, but we break down each and every fight of every card and provide our favorite picks, but as well as our favorite betting spots. So, hope you all had a great Thanksgiving. We missed you last week. It was sad to not have a UFC card, but I was able to make it down to Columbia, South Carolina for the Gamecocks and Clemson game, which in hindsight was not too much fun to watch. From a neutral perspective or a Gamecock perspective. I mean, 16-7 finals, not great, but still had a good time. Family, friends, was wonderful. And so hope you guys have been able to start getting on the Christmas shopping train because your expected value is getting less and less as every day passes. So they're going to start extorting you here soon. So I hope you do. But Andy, how was your Thanksgiving? And are you excited to see Patrick Mahomes in Lambeau on Sunday night?
Yeah, glad you had a happy Thanksgiving. Mine was good. Went home, saw some family, saw my brother, just hung out, had a lot to drink, had a lot to eat. So had a good Thanksgiving overall, I would say. But yeah, man, missing UFC for sure. I was like, yeah, it'll be a nice break to not have to break down a car, not have to watch UFC because I love the sport to death. But having one weekend off every now and again is sometimes a blessing in disguise. But me seeing that I missed it, I was like, oh my God, I cannot wait for this UFC Austin card. And here we are. I feel like you've done a ton of really technical tape study on this card. I feel like I've deep dove a lot of these fights twice over where I feel really comfortable with what we're talking about, what we're going to get into. And I can't wait to deep dive this with you and cram it into 5 minutes so we can get the people what they want, get them out of here, give them our bets, and ready to jump into it.
Yeah, man, it's a good card. It's a hell of a card. Like you said, I mean, I really went deep into tape study, but I just sort of got lost in some of these different matchups. Some interesting lines, but interesting matchups as well. So I'm excited to get into it. I know we've got Veronica Hardy and Jamey-Lyn Horth first up, but before we get over to that, would love to just sort of put a nail in the coffin of the card from 2 weeks ago, the Brendan Allen and Paul Craig card, which lived up to expectations. I thought, at least. I thought it was a pretty fun card. They hit a couple of underdogs. Lost a couple underdogs as well. So I ended up going 2-4-2 with the 2 at the end there being the push with Trey Ogden fight being stopped too early, which really is a travesty. I mean, the UFC will end up doing him right because he was going to win that fight. He was up 2 rounds, was dominating that third round, was about to get the finish. And for whatever reason, man, he thought that arm went limp and he pulled it. But other good fighters on that card that really made an impression on me were Brendan Allen. I thought he was really impressive against Paul Craig, and we highlighted some of the different concerns that Paul Craig can give you. And then Amanda Ribas, I mean, shit, that spinning heel kick was fantastic. And Chase Hooper just dominating Jordan Levitt on the mat real quick to a fast submission. So some pretty emphatic wins for those guys. Some younger guys making their way up and really developing like Chase Hooper, but also Amanda Ribas reminding you that, hey, I'm still Amanda Ribas. I'm still a top 10, and you've got to get through me. So what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I feel like this year, like 2023 as a whole, has been such a big year for some of these young up-and-comers where there are a ton of times where when you're betting these fights, you have to kind of sit back and not look at how bad the vet has fared in their last couple fights and then look at and not necessarily try to discount as heavy how bad the young up-and-comer has done. And a lot of that kind of showed in that last card, in my opinion, where there was a lot of success for some of the youngins that are coming up. And I think that's really exciting for the UFC, especially with all the stuff going around with the Bellator and PFL stuff. There is going to be some pivotal moves made by the UFC in 2024, in 2025, where I feel like it's going to be so important for them to have this young up-and-coming talent because even though UFC didn't have a card, PFL had their card on Black Friday, and everyone was talking about it. There was a lot of talk and buzz about the World Championship fights that they had going on. And I mean, that was strategic and calculated by the PFL, like great business move by them, rightfully so. I mean, they only had a couple football games, and the NFL Black Friday game was already done by the time that their championship fights are going on. So I think the fact that a lot of the young up-and-comers are starting to blossom in the UFC will help be a strategic advantage for them against the PFL and Bellator stuff going on. But I think any competition that the UFC can get right now from a promotional standpoint is going to ultimately be beneficial for the promotion. Any competition will breed what is going to be a positive thing. So overall, that was kind of my main thing from that card turning into what was honestly, man, like a bigger PFL event than the card that we
It was
reviewed
good.
the week before.
Yeah, it was quality too.
It was a lot of fun to watch. I had a blast watching it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, the PFL's made a statement here. I mean, they have made a statement with the acquisition of Bellator that they are going to compete with the UFC. And obviously Ngannou as well. I mean, and it's apparent. So, I mean, they're serious as far as a competitor for the best league in the sport. Like everyone knows right now that it's UFC, and then it was PFL, Bellator, One, sort of, and others. But it's going to be interesting to see how it develops. And you've already seen the UFC today. There's rumors that Michael Venom Page is coming over from Bellator. So that would be a huge get.
Yeah. I think that's
that would be a huge get for the UFC, and it'll be interesting to see if there's any fallout in contracts from the Bellator acquisition to see if the UFC is able to snatch out some guys, because we've seen some entertaining guys come from Bellator, and tons of guys. Most notably recently is Michael Chandler, who people were clamoring for a while, and I mean he's lived up to all the hype and more. So excited to have him over, and I think that it's a good thing for the sport what PFL's done. It pushes Dana White to really be able to pay his fighters. Because that's one thing in the PFL. You get that $1 million paycheck if you win that championship. In the UFC, you're not guaranteed that half of that, really. So fascinating enough. We could talk about that for hours, but we've got a fantastic card here in Houston. A couple main events, or a main event between Beneil Dariush, Arman Tsarukyan, as well as some different fights across that main card, including Kelvin Gastelum, Sean Brady, Rob Font, former champion Figueiredo's on there. So just tons and tons of talent in a fight card that is somehow we're not paying for. So go figure. We've had worse ones that we've had to pay for. I will enjoy every bit of this one for free, as I do most of them anyways. But anyways, without further ado, we will head right into Veronica Hardy facing Jamey-Lyn Horth in our first fight of the night.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to Pilsners and Prelims, a UFC betting podcast by Happy Hour Sports. Just want to ask if you could like and subscribe to the video if you like the content that we're putting out, and be sure to stay tuned to what we have coming up in the future. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you on the other side.
With our first fight of the night, we've got Veronica Hardy taking on the undefeated 6-0, now 1-0 in the UFC, Jamey-Lyn Horth. And before we get to that card, I need to address the fact that I just called this card UFC Houston. This is UFC Austin. I'm confusing the previous Houston cards as well as me going to the CFP here in Houston in January. But I wanted to correct that before we get in. But should be a good card. And really, starting with Hardy here, it's going to be interesting. She's had a weird ride in the UFC so far. 2-4 now, and really has dealt with some different weight issues. Has just 6 fights in 7 years throughout the UFC. Has had some different health concerns, mainly concussion issues, and has bounced around between 125 and 135. When she was at 135, you really saw her struggle. And so she took about 3 years off between the Bia Malecki loss and the Juliana Miller win. And there was quite the difference. She was able to get down to 125, really take care of her body. The weight cut was not as detrimental to her health. And she really looked much, much better. I mean, Juliana Miller came into that fight, I'm looking it up real quick, as a minus 400 favorite and got walked the entire time by Veronica Hardy. The damage that she was able to do on the feet, circling and just being able to land hooks over the top, but also be able to defend all of the different submissions that Juliana Miller throws, was very impressive. She dominated in the clinch, was the bigger fighter, was able to leverage kicks to all 3 levels pretty well, and even hit a very clean head kick in the 3rd round to really put a button on it. So a tale of much development for Hardy despite her poor record. And for Jamey-Lyn Horth, similar in some ways. She fought her debut against Haley Cowan up at 135. And despite Haley Cowan's size at 135, she was able to really look just as physical and just as big as Cowan at that weight. So it'll be interesting to see how that weight cut goes for Horth in this situation, because she's gigantic. She's going to have, I think, a 3-inch size and reach advantage. So she should be the bigger fighter in this fight. And interesting to me is that she's now started to train, and there's rumors that she's training with Alexa Grasso and Lupe Godinez over in Lobo Gym. So
that's confirmed.
Two great,
on her Instagram.
2 great fighters for her to be fighting with and training with, especially on the feet. And so it'll be interesting to see where she's able to see success, because where Hardy sees a lot of success or saw a lot of success So does Horth. At range, she likes to circle a lot, likes to throw a lot of hooks. And where Horth could have an advantage in this fight is in the clinch, too. Those knees for the tie clinch is fantastic. So should be an interesting fight. Andy, where do you sit in this fight?
Yeah, for me with Horth, I think that she needs to defend the takedown threat in order to win. I feel like I get the whole layoff piece with Hardy, and that's what kind of turns me away from her a bit. With Hardy, with that Renzo Gracie background, she trained in England some too. She's been working on her striking a bit, which is good. Like she's improving her game. We've been able to see that, as well as like we've heard it too from what people have said about her. But I don't know how much Hardy's going to be able to throw that striking into her game because we haven't really seen it. We've only heard it. And with how many people Horth has trained with, like the Lupi Godinez piece, the Alexa Grasso piece, she's got pictures of Malcolm Gordon on her Instagram. Like, what better person to train at 125 than Malcolm Gordon? I get Malcolm Gordon hasn't been as successful in the UFC as we want him to be, but I mean, that's an awesome training partner to have when you're at this women's weight class. He's fantastic. So I think with all the experience that Horth has had and all the people she's been able to train with in preparation for this fight, as well as Hardy's weird walk to get here. Like the layoff, I hate it for her. I wish that didn't happen for her. Like the concussion stuff is tough, especially in this sport. I feel like it's not talked about enough. I feel like it's talked about a lot in the NFL, but we are a couple years away from hearing about what the kind of stuff with the brain happens in the UFC because it's become more popular. And it was already happening with her early on with the concussion. So that piece is a little bit worrisome for me with that long layoff. I'm going with Horth here, just due to who she trains with. I think she has a stylistic advantage. I also think that with Hardy, that last time out was I'm not as high on it as others are. And I think with Horth, we've got somebody that the UFC in this fight is positioning either of these girls to pop into the rankings and they get a nice little top 10 fight probably next time out, which is not as uncommon, or excuse me, not as common with the men to get to pop in the rankings and go top 10 as it is with the girls, just because there's not as many girl fighters. So exciting opportunity for both of these gals, but I'm going with Horth.
Gotcha. Fair enough. I'm going to go the other way. I've got Hardy in this fight as a slight underdog. It's grown throughout the week. She was plus 115 to start, ended up moving to about a pick'em, and is now plus 125. I think that the speed is going to be the difference in this fight, and Hardy's ability to strike on the in-between. So between the disengagements and when they're really throwing in the pocket, I think that weight cut for Horth is really going to test. She's already fairly slow and will have the disadvantage. I think that could belabor her a little bit farther, and we could see an advantage for Hardy, but would not be surprised if Horth is able to keep it at range and really dominate the clinch either. So I've got Hardy for a half unit at plus 125. Andy, are you throwing anything officially on this one, bet-wise?
Yeah, so I'm going with Horth minus 130, which is going for minus 140 on Caesars and BetMGM right now. I'm just going to do to win half a unit on Horth. I feel like she's going to win, but I'm not confident enough to be like, I'm going to throw a full on unit on this one. I think this one's going to be a really entertaining one where you're going to want to crack open a beer or make some popcorn for it. I think it's going to be a really solid women's MMA fight, but not one that I'm willing to start opening up the bankroll in full on. But I do really like Horth.
Gotcha. So both of us are split on the fight as well as our bets, but should be a good fight, as you said, and looking forward to the next fight. We've got Wellington Turman coming up against Jared Gooden in a combination or in a pair of UFC fighters that combine for a 4-9 UFC record. So should be fun. Let's get into it in just a second. For the second fight of the night, we've got Wellington Turman, 18-7, 3-5 in the UFC now, coming up against Jared Gooden, 22-9, 1-4 in the UFC. So a pretty rough run for him. And really, Wellington Turman coming off the back of 2 losses, 2 straight decision losses, with the latter being up against Randy Brown, who was able to knock Gooden out of the UFC back in 2021. And Gooden didn't make weight in his last fight. That's been a common theme throughout a lot of his fights, where he struggled to make weight by a good number, but you don't really see it affect him too much. And we'll get into that in a second. But that was against Carlson Harris, who ironically beat Wellington Turman by unanimous decision back in 2016 when they were both on Immortal FC. But Turman fighting at 170 pounds for the second time now in the UFC, moving down, was the bigger fighter in his first fight. Now should be, in theory, the bigger fighter unless Jared Gooden comes up and doesn't make weight again. But I know you're big anti people who don't make weight. So I would love to hear your thoughts on Gooden and sort of the matchup as a whole with Turman moving down to 170.
For sure. There's the anti-making weight fade. There's the OnlyFans fade. There's a couple others in the book. But with Turman, you look at the guy, and he's just a super scary Brazilian dude. Like, the guy's shredded. He's got a tattoo across the middle of his chest and a pretty cool sleeve, I have to admit. But, however, in my opinion, like, with the nickname The Prodigy, and a lot of these guys have the nicknames like this. It's so dumb. But he hasn't really lived up to The Prodigy, right? He's been with the promotion since 2019, holds a record of 3-5. 1 sub, 2 decisions, and a couple of knockout losses and a few decision losses too. His 2 wins are to Sam Alvey and to Miesha Cernikov, who are both no longer in the UFC. So for me, it's like when you move down to welterweight from middleweight last time out and you lose handily to Randy Brown, who stud. I mean, hey, big Rude Boy fan here. It's just there's not a lot that you're able to do heading into your next fight for me to be like, wow, can't wait to watch this one. And then you go to Jared Gooden, and he's 1-4 in the UFC. He missed weight at 177, to your point last time. So that's not like a 1 or 2 pound thing. Like, he missed weight you can weigh in at 171 and make weight in the UFC. You can go 1 over. He weighed in 6 pounds over last time. Like, that's just not a great look when you get kicked out of the UFC. You miss weight in your final fight in the UFC. They bring you back and you miss weight again. It's just not a good look.
Also against Randy Brown.
Yeah, also against Rude Boy. Rihanna there, shout out. But I think when you compare the resumes, for me, that's the difference here. Where you look at the guys that Gooden has lost to, Randy Brown, I'm going to butcher the name, Kasangane, who's now at the PFL, which, I mean, I touched on it briefly in the last preview. Hey, $1 million winner there, man. I mean, congrats to the light heavyweight champion. He moved up from middleweight to light heavyweight, whereas Gooden has done the opposite and moved from middleweight to welterweight. But you lost to a $1 million winner over the weekend in the PFL now, so that's another good loss. I think, and Rick, in part of my tape study, I've done some scouting out what some of our other counterparts in the MMA media space have said. There are some guys in the space that are saying, "Oh, well, Wellington has the advantage in experience." I disagree. I think Gooden has the advantage in experience, where his resume is so much better. The people he's fought are a lot better, where I give him the edge here. And I'm interested to see what you think from a tactical standpoint.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Turman definitely has a better camp. He trains with Poatan and Glover. And his calf kicks reflect. I mean, they are very Poatan-esque in that, like, it only takes a couple and they're hurting. You're limping, you're circling, you're doing whatever. And he's got the better skills. I mean, he is definitely the more skilled MMA fighter. He's got it on the ground with his BJJ, on the feet. He's got every weapon you can think of. But the issue is all of the intangibles. Every one of the intangibles he misses. He doesn't have durability. He's not able to fight through. He can get washed in every fight. He's been slept multiple times. And even that win against Miesha Cerkinov, he was wobbled in that fight. He almost got finished in the first round before being able to get in that armbar. And he struggles to be able to blend all of his different skill sets together. Now, flipping over to Gooden, though, he's durable, which you don't like to know, especially when he has taken, I mean, and he will take tons of clean shots. And Turman's a big guy. Obviously, we mentioned that he's coming down in weight. He's a big guy. And Gooden does himself no favors, keeping his arms by his side, jabbing to but he does have good, powerful strikes. And I do think that he's going to have the striking advantage in this fight. And he's got good takedown defense. In that Carlston-Harris fight, he did really well, not allowing any takedowns, stuffing them all early. And then when Carlston-Harris was able to get it when he tired out a little bit, that's when it was a little bit more questionable. But the fight IQ, the durability, the inability to mesh all of his different abilities for Turman just gives me a red flag, gives me pause in this fight against a guy in Gooden who's never going to go away. Like, he's going to be able to take a punch and then give one right back to you. And if he can do that and keep it on the feet, I think Gooden as a dog is very live in this fight, despite being far less talented, which is weird to say. He doesn't make weight, but that never really inhibits his ability. It's not like he's hurt. It's a consistent thing. And so I've got him to finish in the first or second round. Plus, I've got to find the odds again. But yeah, I'll hand it over to you while I'm finding the odds, Andy. What do you got in this fight?
Yeah, so betting wise, I'm going to stay away with two guys that are so shitty in the UFC. No offense to them, respect to their game and all that, but I can't I cannot legitimately be like I'm going to put my money on this unless I'm going to find some really good value flyers, which you're looking up now. But for a pick standpoint, I am going to go with the underdog here. If I'm going to go with Gooden. I really feel sincerely that he has the advantage stylistically. I feel like he has the advantage from an experience standpoint. And I don't think the odds should be this far separated. I mean, from MMA odds standpoint, he's a average underdog. He's not like a huge underdog by any means, but I do think that you're still finding good value. If you decide to bet on Gooden in this one, then go ahead. I mean, I think that you're really finding good value in what should be a lot closer odds-wise, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I've got Gooden inside the distance. I think that if we go to a decision, like he's going to wane in the second half of this fight more than likely. I think that his best case is being able to wobble and then be able to finish Wellington Turman. And don't sleep on his ability on the ground either. Wellington Turman is the BJJ guy who's going to get the headlines here. But Jared Gooden's got 7 submissions to his name as well. I mean, he's well-versed on the ground too. He's slippery. And that takedown defense, even if it lacks, he can do a little bit on the ground. So it could be interesting there. I don't think that he'll get a submission. But inside the distance, I've got him at plus 300. And I'll put a half unit on that. I'm fairly confident in Gooden to be able to get it done. So half unit for me, no bet for Andy, but we're both going with Gooden. Next fight, we've got an interesting one with Rodolfo Bellato making his UFC debut against Ihor Potieria.
Coming up next, we've got Ihor Potieria taking on Rodolfo Bellato, who, Rick, don't you think someone with the last name Bellato, someone like Bellator would throw a bag at because it's one letter off of what their promotion's name is? I mean, come on. But anywho, that's besides the point. We have an awesome light heavyweight fight coming up here, and it is pretty one-sided as far as the betting odds go. Rodolfo is all the way up to minus 455 on most sites. And we've got Potieria at his best odds at plus 340, but typically around plus 300, plus 320, most places you look. As far as Rodolfo goes, the guy's a fucking tank. He is an absolute tank. And a fun fact for you, he's got 2 losses. Both of them are to Vitor Petrino, who we have talked about a bit on this podcast. He looked solid against him both times out as well. He fought him in ex-MMA, and then he fought him in the Contender Series. And both times he lost via finish to him. He lost by KO, but I do think that is worth putting some stock into because Petrino is an absolute stud as far as mixed martial arts goes, as far as UFC prospects go in this division. And that's who Bellato has lost to both times. That's kind of been his kryptonite guy, similar to Izzy with Pereira, right? Maybe we'll see that link up here down the road. But for me, I think it's very interesting that he came in on the Dana White Contender Series again, was pitted against the Dagestani fighter Taha as a plus 225 dog, and he just walked him down and finished him. Guys don't do that to Dagestani fighters like that often. And I find that very impressive, and that's the type of style you're going to see out of him. He's going to walk you down. He's going to gas you out. That's what he did against Petrino. And Petrino caught him at the right time in one of their bouts, and that's what put him out. And like that's going to get any guy. That's not necessarily something that's detrimental to his style necessarily. I think that Bellato has the potential to be a stud in this division, and that's why they're giving him Ihor. Like for Ihor, it's the story of like there's a lot of hype coming from him. The Ukrainian piece, I think, is also very hype storyline for him with all this stuff going on in Ukraine. It's a really cool story for him to be brought up in this division, and he was the guy who put Shogun out for Shogun's retirement fight. You and I watched that one together. I put no stock in that because I thought Shogun looked okay in that fight, which is saying a lot. Shogun was 42, 43 during the time of that fight. Rodolfo keeps his hands up and has decent defense for this division. It isn't saying a lot. The light heavyweight division, the defense as a whole in this division is not great. I just don't think that what Ihor has to offer is going to be any threat to Bellato's style. I think if you have a solid takedown or submission game, you could probably catch Bellato, but it's not really something that the Ukrainian is going to catch him with. in Ihor's other fights, he just hasn't looked great since coming out of Dana White Contender Series, besides the gift that he got from Shogun. So kind of interested to hear what you think about this one, but I think my stance on this one's pretty apparent.
Yeah, I think Ihor didn't have the hardest level of competition coming into the UFC. He was 19-2 coming into the UFC, and a lot of those guys 1-2, 3-2, 1-6, 3-2. Like he didn't really face much competition, and so he really ran his way up the ladder there. He's got a number of submissions to his name, but really hasn't used it at all really in his UFC career. So I doubt this is the fight to use it against Bellato, who has 4 submissions to his name. He's a 3rd degree black belt, and he's gotten them in different ways too. He's got leg locks, he's had triangles, he's got a bunch of different ways he can do it. And his defensive wrestling is pretty solid as is. So I expect this fight to stay on the feet. Well, both of these guys have gotten knocked out before numerous times. And though Bellato has only had, I think, those 2 finishes to Vitor Petrino, he's gotten wobbled in other fights. And that's concerning to me a bit. But Potieria, in the same sense, has gotten wobbled in even more fights. And they both sort of walk into fights. Yes, Bellato keeps his hands up, but because he's the aggressor and is going to walk guys down, he can walk into shots. And at light heavyweight, you can't just walk into every shot. You're going to get dropped and you're going to get put out if you get hit clean. I'm not saying that there's value on the Potieria side. I haven't been wowed with him, much like your take on Shogun. He didn't really look great. Like he doesn't react to leg kicks well. In Bellato, and I know I said this in the last fight, this is sort of the case for a number of fighters on this card. Bellato's got great calf kicks. If he can start that early and then really be able to slow down Potieria, and then he can mix it up pretty well as well, then we could be in for a slaughtering of Potieria. And so I emphatically have Bellato. I'm not going to put him in any parlays. I might bring somebody down for -200 later in the card, but I haven't really decided on that yet. But right now, no play for me. I've got Potieria, or sorry, not Potieria. I just combined the 2 of them. Bellato pretty solidly in this fight. Interested to see how the debut goes. Interested to see if Potieria can remind people that, hey, he's a finisher, and he can survive a little bit, because Olberg just shut his lights out early in that fight. But yeah, I'm on Bellato. What about you? Seems like you're on Bellato.
I'm also on Bellato, but I'm with you. When you hit odds this high, once those odds hit north of -300 or even -350, you just can't throw that into a parlay anymore. It doesn't throw much value. To your point, you have to pair it with something that's like -200, -190, 180, whatever, and to actually get any value out of it. So I'm not going to take a betting angle on this one, but I that's my pick for the fight. And I can't wait to watch him beat the brakes off of Ihor. I think that there could be some prop potential. There's not enough prop markets out right now as we record this Tuesday evening, but that's something to check out our Twitters for. So follow me on Twitter at AndyHH Sports. Follow Rick on Twitter at RickHH Sports. Rick tweets out even more plays after the podcast than I do for UFC. So definitely give us both a follow if you're looking for stuff to kind of follow up with your listening with your tape study with, because we will give out more plays, but nothing betting wise here for us. We're both going with Bellato, not to be confused with Bellator. And coming up next,
one last point too to finish off that point. Make sure to follow us for future cards as well, because we'll be looking at some tape and some stuff throughout this weekend and throughout the rest of this week. So make sure to get on lines early, because there's a lot of lines you can get on early and get some good value in. One of which I got in early on this card, and I'll bring it up later. But yeah, make sure to follow us to capitalize on what you were about to say. Both of us going Bellato. I might look into a first round prop, but right now the under is at 1.5 and the under is -185. So we'll see a finish in this fight. Both of us going Bellato, and we will see you back for the Steve Garcia versus Melquizael Costa fight next. See you there.
Coming up next in the featherweight division, we have Steve Garcia taking on my boy Melk Costa. For Steve Garcia, he has had a definitely interesting UFC career where a lot of people probably know him from the Chase Super fight. A lot of people probably had Chase Super in your bets and your parlays, whatever, when they did fight. And Steve Garcia was the guy who busted those for you. So he definitely busted them for Rick and I back when they fought. An interesting thing for me, he is 3-2 in the UFC. with losses to Luis Pena as well as Mahashet, but he also beat Chepe Mariscal in the LFA, which was his final fight heading into the UFC, which I think is interesting. Like, he has some interesting names on his resume, which means that he's not just going to be some walk in the park for my boy Costa here. So I am a big fan of Costa. I wrote about him in the January pay-per-view that he was on. I believe he was on the Jamal Hill card against Glover Teixeira when Jamal won the belt. Shout out to the true champion. But I think Garcia is a really tough test for him, where we saw it against Chase Hooper. We saw it against some other guys for Garcia. I did end up referencing those UFC 283 notes a bit when I was looking at my Costa tape. And for me, the reason why I like him so much is how much of a dynamic striker he is. And that's what stood out from when we've watched him fight, as well as from when I previewed that fight almost a year ago now, is how much this guy just loves to stand and bang. He is going to throw. He's going to sit in the pocket, and he's not going to let you back him down. And if you do start to back him down, he's going to find the holes and then just start walking you down. The issue for me is he has that lack of ground game, which I think Steve Garcia might be able to exploit, as well as there is some times where he shows a lack of creativity, where you kind of know when and what he's going to throw. I do think that this matchup heavily favors him against Garcia, where it's not like Garcia has some exquisite ground game that's going to take advantage of Costa. And I do think that he holds that striking advantage where he's going to be able to really piece up Garcia. But Garcia is not going to go down without a really gross, disgusting fight. So I'm really excited to watch this. What do you have, Rick, on this one?
Yeah, this should be one of the more entertaining fights of the night. And to your point, I mean, it's Steve Garcia. Both of their styles just match up for entertainment. Garcia's had some mixed results throughout his career. I know you mentioned the on his name right now, pulling it up, the Chepe Mariscal victory, but he also lost by split decision to Ricky Tercios back in Bellator. So he's had some mixed results before his time to the UFC, and really it's been the same trend in the UFC. He's got some good offensive wrestling, but he's not going to want to use it in this fight because Costa's pretty slippery on the ground. And on the feet, he's long. His boxing combinations are long, and he likes to sort of squat as he goes in and then launch out of it, sort of like a frog in a way, if you think of frog. And it gives him extra reach, but it also makes him extend himself out to where he can get clocked. And that's exactly what happened in the Mahasate loss, where he was slept over just over a minute in the fight. But he's a dog. He's going to get in there. He's going to be able to throw hooks, and that length is able to clip guys. The Shailon Nurdenbeke fight was an interesting fight where he ended up winning via a liver punch in the second round as an underdog. But in that first round, he was almost knocked out 1 minute in. He got hit as clean as anyone get hit, got dropped, and then was getting ground and pounded and out wrestled. But then he stood up and said, "All right, let's go," and then took it to Nurdenbeke, almost finished him in the first round, finished him at the beginning of the second round. And so impressive to see that grit in him. Costa, same way. He came in on short notice in his UFC debut, as you mentioned, looked good against Thiago Silva, didn't get the dub. But then he came back and fought Austin Lingo. And that's a fight that told me a lot about how this fight's going to go. Because Austin Lingo, if you haven't seen him before, if you haven't watched him, he is like Drew Dober without the aggressiveness of Drew Dober. He can take a punch and he can just keep taking your shots until eventually, Drew Dober gets slept these days, but the amount of body kicks that he took in that fight to the calf, straight kicks up the middle, stomps, everything to every level should have dropped any man. There were times where Lingo was sitting there just cringing, but he wouldn't go down because he's Austin Lingo and he's made of bricks. But the cardio of Costa and the relentless wrestling of Costa could be the difference in this fight. If he's able to mix it up, I think he'll be able to get Garcia on the ground if he needs to. And he's one of those guys that is able to blend his skills together well. And so if he can start to really see success with the kicks, especially to the body, that really opens up the head kicks and he can hit those clean. And he's good at recognizing that. So I think he's got many different ways to win this fight. And he can also hit those counter punches when guys rush into. So he's gotten many different paths to victory in this one. And I really don't like how many times Garcia's gotten clipped in the past. This sort of feels like one of those fights for Costa where you're rewarded for that initial fight against Thiago Santos. This is a little bit of a step up, but enough of one to where you continue to build that hype behind you. So I think he's one guy that's going to be here for the future. And at just 27 years of age, I think that Costa is going to be here for a while. So I've got Costa. I've got no bet on it at the moment. The odds are sort of going back and forth. Costa's about minus 230 right now, depending on where you look. Andy, you got any bets on this fight?
So I'm going Costa as my pick, and I'm going Costa in a parlay piece, which I'll touch on later in the card. So I'm with you. You can't just take a minus 230 guy straight up unless you feel absolutely confident that it's going to hit. I'm okay with doing that once every now and again, but this isn't necessarily one that you should be doing that with once every now and again. I think it's a fantastic parlay piece, though, and that's the way that I'm going to go. So Rick and I both have Mr. Melky Costa himself, and we are now going to head into the next fight on the lightweight division with Joe Solecki taking on Drakkar Klose. So stay with us, and we will preview the next fight.
Rolling on into the next fight, we've got our biggest stylistic mismatch of the night with Drakkar Klose coming in and fighting Joe Solecki. Both fighters with very impressive UFC records through their tenure. Drakkar Klose being 7-2 in the UFC now. Joe Solecki now 5-1. And as I said, this is as big stylistic mismatches we've seen so far on this card and throughout this card, more than likely. Solecki, if you haven't seen him before, is one of the more dominant and elite MMA wrestlers and grapplers that we've seen. Now, not in some situations, he's very position over submission. But as far as MMA goes and being able to mix in his wrestling to his striking and being able to blend it and keep guys down, he's about as good as anyone. The issue is that on the feet, while he's improved and while it is now respectable, he's not going to be able to go toe-to-toe with Drakkar Klose and be able to live to see the next day. Drakkar Klose is somebody that can work other guys. Whether he gets taken down in the first round, the second round, that third round, he's still going to come out firing. And that's what he did in his last fight to Rafa Garcia, where in that third round, he exhausted him. I mean, he just put his foot on the gas, stood on it, and then just kept going until Rafa just couldn't take anymore. Klose in his own right is a good offensive wrestler. He's not going to use it. And defensively, his grappling isn't good. That's where I think that this fight can get really interesting because he makes a lot of mistakes when he's trying to get up. He'll put he'll put all four on the mat. He'll give up his back way too often. Happened to Beneil Dariush, which happened to Lando Venata, and also happened against other opponents as well. He's good in the stand-up. His body kicks are good. He's got good dirty boxing. And he doesn't overextend himself. So there's a chance that he could be able to keep this fight in range, but his defensive grappling is very suspect to me, and I think that's where Solecki could have some success. But, Andy, how do you see it? Do you think Drakkar is going to be able to keep it on the feet?
That's where I am not able to fully grasp a betting angle on this one. I've said it before, and you know me, I tend to lean the guy who can get the fight to the ground when it comes to a clash of styles like this, especially if you're skilled in that world. I feel like Solecki is very skilled there, but I feel like Klose is able to at least kind of find his way. Where one of the things that I found myself continuing to reference is like his fight against Dariush, where he was able to at least last that full first round, where Dariush was a backpack on him and Klose weathered the storm and then ended up losing in round 2. But he was able to, like, Dariush, who is much better than Solecki in my opinion, especially in the grappling world, in the submission game. Drakkar Klose was able to outlast him, and that's what I found it to be so interesting, where I just know that Solecki is not going to be able to take the hits that Klose is going to be able to put on him. I also really worry about Solecki's gas tank. Solecki is more of a MMA grappling guy, not like a true jiu-jitsu artist. And he is a position over submission guy to a fault. So, like, that's the way you should do it. But, like, to a fault where he's, like, going to work and gain the position, but I don't think he works towards the submission enough to continue to improve the position, improve, and then get the sub. I just don't think that he does that enough. So the UFC level of competition for him is kind of lackluster in my opinion as well. I'm just not a huge Solecki guy, but I don't trust Klose to not let his guard down and let it slip, even though he has never been submitted, which is interesting. So I don't think Solecki would be the first one to submit him, but I do think that there is a world where Solecki just kind of rides him like a backpack and is able to win a really boring fight. And that's why I'm kind of staying away, even though from a pick standpoint, I'm going to pick Klose to win, but I can't put my hard-earned money on the guy, to be honest with you.
Josh, yeah, I'm going the other way, but I mean, I hear in all of the concerns that you make, I agree with. My frustration with Klose is that some of the mistakes that he makes in getting up and then giving up his back, but also in being held down. Not only does he make the mistakes trying to get up, but he can just get held down and sit down. And given, like you said, Solecki will just hold you down and stay on top of you. Drakkar Klose is no like prime finisher. He's got 5 knockouts. He's got 8 decision wins. So we could end up seeing a fight where Solecki for 2 of the 3 rounds just holds him down and he wins 29-28 in a pretty decisive, boring affair. But I also think that he could get the next. So I've got Solecki as a slight underdog, and the line's actually moving towards Solecki. Last week it was plus 120. 2 days ago, it was plus 107. Yesterday, it was plus 100. Now it's minus 105. So the money's coming in on Solecki here. And I think that we'll end up getting right at where it's at right now, which is a pick 'em fight. I think that's like, it's hard to guess where this is. It's either going to be oil in the fact that Klose keeps on the feet, dominates, or Solecki gets on the ground and is able to dominate there. Doesn't feel like there's much in between.
Yeah, for sure. This is once again something that we love to watch is the classic striker versus the grappler, and it just depends who you give the edge because I think there's plenty of flaws in both these guys' games. So if you're looking to bet on it, best of luck. But I'm going with Klose. You're going with Solecki.
And I'm going with Solecki. I'm putting a half unit on him, and I'll take it.
Oh, okay. You're going with the bet.
Yeah, I'll take a half unit on Solecki minus 105. I got it in at plus 107, but obviously I didn't tweet that out. So minus 105 for me for Solecki, half unit, split again on the picks. Should be a fun one.
Yeah, I love going head to head with you. I think it's a lot of fun. So if you want to keep seeing us go head to head or side with each other, keep it locked in as we preview next. Cody Brundage taking on Zach Reese at middleweight. And coming up next at middleweight, we have Cody Brundage taking on Zach Reese. And Rick, I feel like Cody Brundage is someone that we have mentioned a lot recently in our fight previews and our recent videos. And it's because we have. Brundage lost to Rodolfo Vieira, who pulled out as we were recording our UFC Sao Paulo card. So the video went out, but ultimately we never got to see Vieira fight. And then Brundage lost to Cedric Dumas, who we previewed on the UFC 294 card in October. Yeah, our guy, Cedric Dumas. He also has fights against William Knight in the Contender Series, Nick Maximov, the notorious Nate Diaz boy, and then Tresean Gore, not our guy, but a Ultimate Fighter alum with the Vulcan T-City season. So a lot of those were losses besides the Tresean Gore fight. And then the recent win for him, or should I say win, because it was an illegal elbow to the back of the head to Jacob Malkoun, who is a shared opponent of them both. So Brundage has a long resume since joining the UFC in 2021, which I mean, good for him. 7 fights since joining in 2021. But when your 7 fights are 3-4, or what should be 2-5, and you're going up against somebody in Zach Reese, who comes off, sorry, they don't have a shared opponent with Jacob Malkoun. I stepped out of line there, but it comes off the Contender Series in August and is getting this turnaround here in November. I just kind of feel like they're feeding Brundage to the wolves here after what should not have been a win for him, his last fight out. And this is an interesting spot for Reese, who's favored at minus 260, but I don't necessarily know if his resume or the fight tape warrants those odds. What do you think?
So there's not much tape out there. And there's not much tape out there, not because it doesn't exist, but because his fights don't last long. And he's 29 years old now. 11 years ago, his amateur debut was against none other than Kevin Holland back in Cowboys Extreme Cage Fighting. He lost by decision in that fight, and obviously he was 18 years old. Kevin Holland at the time was 1-0 professionally, so it's not like that you can take really much from that fight. But then he took 5 years off. Had a couple more amateur fights, and then every single one of his professional fights, he's finished in the first round, and 5 of those have come really within a minute. One was just after a minute, but for the sake of the point, basically just a minute in. And in watching each of those fights, zero of his opponents gave him any sort of like I could have probably done about equal to what his opponents did. There was no damage back his way. I don't think anyone landed a strike against him. No one has tested him. No one has shown. No one's given any sort of like when they're on the ground. He immediately just progresses to mount. Is either able to finish via submission or just ground and pound his way to victory against Malik Jameyl-Lyn back in 2021. He tried a Kimura, failed, but then he just got a body lock, took him down, flattened him out, and submitted him, all within a minute. And same goes against Fred Zamora in his professional debut, where he took him down, squared him up, and then landed 3 nasty elbows that just knocked him out cold. So there's not much, but what we've seen from him is that he has got every tool available. He can kick to all levels. He's got powerful punching. His wrestling is dominant, and his grappling and his ground and pound are deadly. Now, this is such a gigantic step up in competition. Even though Cody Brundage should be 0-4 in his last 4 fights and be 2-5 in the UFC, this is still a huge step up in competition for Zach Reese. And so it'll be interesting to see if he's able to pass that test. But Brundage, for everything that I like about Brundage, it is very much a tale of when he quits or when he finds that he's going to lose the fight. Because he looks great until it looks horrible. And when it looks horrible, he pretty much just submits and says, I'm done. I'm out of here. Like, where you finish me real quick, ref, step in. Without actually calling for the ref, he might as well be calling for the ref. Because as soon as that gas tank goes, he's done. As soon as he gets damaged, he's out. And so I can see that being the case with Reese here, where you have a reputable name. You've got a guy who could test you in certain areas potentially. But more than likely, I see Reese finishing him. And so that's where I've got this fight going. I've got Reese winning the fight. The odds are way too thick for my liking, and I think that's why they've come down over the past 5 days. He opened around minus 300. It was about minus 275 last week. Now he's down to minus 220. And so I think that's a much more reasonable parlay piece. And so I'm going to do him with Costa. That's my parlay from plus 104. I've got a full unit on that. Melky Costa, we talked about it before. I expect him to win. I expect Reese to do the same, but there could definitely, an upset by Brundage would not shock me. If Reese got exposed here, it wouldn't surprise me. He's a UFC fighter, but Brundage is respectable.
Yeah, you are braver than I am. I can't put my hard-earned money on this fight. To your point, for every good thing I can say about Brundage, there's probably a bad thing or two I could say about him. But for Zach Reese, there's so many unknowns that I can't justify the minus 260 odds. And there's enough good things to say about Brundage and in the way that he fights and the fact that he's been through so many UFC fights and the experience versus Zach Reese, who has little to no experience in the sense of octagon time, in the sense of time actually spent in professional fights, because the guys that he has fought are all chumps. They are nobodies besides my boy Kevin Holland, an amateur. But there's just so many unknowns about the fight where I'm really going to sit back and take some notes when I watch this one, because I'm interested to see, is Zach Reese worth a damn? That's the question I'm going to be looking for in this fight. And the minus 260 odds say yes, but my wallet says no. I'm not going to take anything on it. But from a pick standpoint, I am going to go with the experience. I'm going to go with the dog here. I'm going to take Brundage just based on that he's going up against somebody who lacks that type of time in the octagon in Zach Reese. So Rick is going with Zach Reese here. He's parlaying it with our guy, Mr. Melky Costa himself. I'm going with Brundage as the pick, but no bet on my side. So stay tuned with us as we take on another great women's bantamweight bout here in Miesha Tate taking on Julia Avila. Stay tuned.
With the final prelim of the night, we've got Miesha Tate, Cupcake Miesha Tate, against Julia Avila. And if you're watching the video we've got right here, I have her nickname, Raging Panda. Should be a fun fight, even if I don't go Raging Panda, not to spoil my pick too early. But should be a fun one. Avila's been out of the octagon for a while, and Miesha Tate has had some incredible UFC story. 6-6 in the UFC is not sexy, and it's also really not telling of how good she's been across her career or the competition that she's faced. When she fought for the championship fight against Amanda Nunes back in 2016, That was UFC 200. She headlined a card where you had prime Brock Lesnar, Daniel Cormier, Jose Aldo, Anderson Silva, Frankie Edgar, Cain Velasquez, Juliana Pena, TJ Dillashaw. Like there were more too. Like those are just the top like title championship type people. But she headlined that card. I mean, she's a name. She took 5 years off from 2016 to 2021. Was given a layup in her fight in a return against Marion Renault, where she was able to finish her in the third round. But then she got beat by Ketlin Vieira and Lauren Murphy in her last 2 fights. And she was in a UFC Fight Pass last December, and she got armbarred. So it hasn't been sexy in her return, despite that Marion Renault win. But she did look better against Lauren Murphy. I know that sounds a little bit weird. She was down to 125 for that fight. Now she's back up to her usual 135. So she's going to feel a lot healthier. She's going to feel a lot more full. And she's really taken the time over these past few years to get right. She had a fight against Mayra Buena Silva, canceled earlier this year. She was injured before that. And so it'll be interesting to see where she's able to find success in this. One of the issues that I think could be interesting in this fight that really isn't a stylistic thing, but her nose has been busted up in the past. She's had to get it fixed, but she gets bloodied up and it can be a bad visual. And in women's fights, that can be important. There's not a lot of wobbling or TKOs, knockouts in women's fights, but that visual, just blood smeared across your face, a busted up nose, is not a good one. And then Avila is a person who can really be able to do that to you. Despite just being 3-1 in the UFC, she's 35 years old. She doesn't look it. She looks young, but she just had a child. She's had gym issues in the past. And so she's got some different issues. And she's had 10 fight cancellations in the same time that she's had 4 fights. She had 4 scheduled fights against Karol Rosa and never fought her. I guess we'll never see the historic Julia Avila fight versus Karol Rosa, but she also had 3 scheduled against Nika Montano. But it'll be interesting because Avila is more of a brawler. Tate's more technical. Can she damage Tate is really going to be the question that I have, and that needs to be answered. So, Andy, do you think that Avila can damage Tate more than Tate's able to get Avila and land?
I don't. I think Avila swings heavy, and the 2-year break for me is a bit concerning, and I'll get into that. But she was actually kicked out of her gym during her time off, and I think that weighs a bit on you, and that is a bit concerning to me. She also had a child while she was off, and I'm not trying to discriminate against anything with that. It's more so the fact that is such an enduring experience that somebody has to go through with their body, and you go back into fighting in a cage, and I think that gives Tate a bit of an edge. I think this is a bit of a gift for Tate, even though Tate's been on such a skid. I mean, like 1-4 in the last 5, that's not great. But when you look at the quality of the people that she's lost to, she had her 2 losses in 2016, then her 2 losses in 2021 and 2022. That opponent's skill gap is massive compared to anything that Avila has seen. I think that skill gap at the top of the women's bantamweight division, you talk about Miesha Tate headlining that card. She was at the tip top of women's MMA. And there is such a huge gap where it's like gals have to take the leap up to get into that upper echelon. And there really is no in between. And that's how they kind of struggle to get a lot of female fighters, in my opinion, where it's difficult for the UFC to find really skilled mixed martial artists in some of these female divisions that stick at the top. And Miesha Tate's been one that's been able to stick, even though she's had a rough go of it. The people that she's lost to have been top of the top. And Avila's never really seen that before. So when you pair that with a lot of the stuff that you hear out of the 2 years off for Avila, I can't believe I'm saying this, man, but like Miesha Tate's just good value here at plus 135. I get that it's just a slight underdog, but I really do feel like with the stuff with the camp, with Avila having a shot, congratulations to her. But like there's so much stuff going into this on her side and a lot of baggage compared to Tate, where the only baggage is really just the skilled people that she's lost to. I'm going to go Tate here, and I'm going to go Tate for half a unit at plus 135. What do you have?
Yes, I'm going Tate as well. I've got a little bit more on it. I won't do a full unit, but I've done 3/4 of a unit, which our viewers might roll their eyes at. I'm not willing to risk too much on Tate. I feel pretty good about it. Tate's got enough red flags, and that she doesn't move her head much, but I don't really see Avila to be the one to knock her out. And she doesn't really have much knockout power, but she is very, very volume heavy. She's got good jabs. She's got good calf kicks. And what I really liked is that Lauren Murphy fight. That gave me a lot of confidence in this one. in that she took a lot of damage. She was bloodied up in that fight. But she was never deterred. She stood on the gas the entire time and said, hey, let's fucking go. I'm 36 years old. This is my second stint. I may be 6-5 on a loss streak in the UFC, but damn it, I'm here to fucking fight. I'm here to win a championship. And so that type of will, and now against a lesser opponent, this feels like a fight where it's a remember the name. I'm Miesha Tate, and I'm coming for one more run towards the title. Because there's not that many people that I'm like overly like wowed with in the women's division right now. So she could notch a win here, be able to get a decent opponent, maybe win that one, and all of a sudden you're right back in the title picture. So,
and to your point, in the bantamweight division for women, it's there's really not that many people she has to go through. Like, and she moved down to go fight Lauren Murphy at 125, moved back up to 135, and I think that she's going to be able. She has a decent chance. So this will get her there.
She was scheduled to face Mayra Bueno Silva back in June until she got injured. Mayra Bueno Silva's fighting for the championship now. There's no Amanda Nunes left in this division, and in my opinion, we should scrap the division because it's so low quality now. But that's a conversation for another day. We're both going with Cupcake Miesha Tate to get it done at 37 years old, and pretty confidently so. Back in her betting wise, I've got 3/4 of a unit. Andy's got a half unit at plus 135. Next up, we've got a fellow UFC legend in Clay Guida, who is 18-17 in the UFC, coming up against Joaquim Silva, who is 5-4 in the UFC. Not sexy records, two sexy opponents. We'll see you there. And coming up for the first fight on our main card, Clay Guida fighting in his 36th UFC fight, possibly a retirement fight. Just got moved up to the main card from the prelims. They're sort of shuffling fights around, so if this fight's before another one, then excuse us. We recorded on Tuesday night where they're still shuffling things around. But facing Joaquim Silva, now 5-4 in the UFC, came into the UFC 7-0, undefeated. Has had a mixed bag of results so far, but if you don't know Clay Guida, you're probably newer to UFC, and you're in for a wild ride of emotions with Clay Guida. It is from the first whistle. He is going to be bouncing back and forth. If you're watching the video, he's going to bounce back and forth the whole time and just throw sporadic shots. He's going to wrestle fuck you until he's successful or until he's knocked out. And he's able to mix everything together. He uses hooks to enter, which can get him clipped pretty easily because he stands pretty square as he's throwing them. It's got him knocked out in the past, but I guess when you have 35 fights, pretty much everything that can happen will happen at that point. But his bread and butter and what makes him so successful and what makes him a fan favorite is that just going to push the pace and exhaust the opponent, even if he's the less talented guy. He's just going to make them tap. As soon as their energy's done, he's just going to keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing. And against a guy like Silva, where his intangibles are horrible, that could breed a lot of success for him. Silva's not very durable. Silva's got bad cardio. Silva doesn't have good takedown defense. So there were a lot of things right off the bat that you're like, well, Clay Guida could have a lot of success. The difference is that Silva's got knockout power. Silva has 3 fights in his last 4 years now. So he hasn't been that active. But he's lost to some good fighters. His wins are against Jared Gordon and Jesse Bronson, but his losses are against Nasrat Haqparast, Arman Tsarukyan, who's obviously headlining this fight. But yeah, I mean, he looks good when you're staring at him, but he's not really that great. He's got the power to knock out Clay Guida, and that's how he'd win if he does, more than likely. But I think that Clay Guida could withstand a little bit of that, and then if he survives and sees the second round, well, here we go. It's the Clay Guida show, and this retirement fight could be very entertaining, unlike our aforementioned Shogun Rua, who wasn't as sexy. He just sort of was like, I'm done. So, but Andy, what do you think about this fight? Everyone loves Clay Guida, and I keep saying Quay, like I've got a lisp or something, like a little kid. Clay Guida, everyone loves it. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I love Clay Guida, man, but I do find this fight to be an interesting one where I'm not huge on either side. I feel like everything I'm seeing says that I should go with Silva. One tidbit about Silva that we need to touch on. His nickname is Neto BJJ. The guy has no submissions in the UFC. I mean, his nickname is literally like an Xbox gamer tag. Like, hey, Neto BJJ dropping in. But I think with his game, you're not going to see him doing a ton on the ground with Clay Guida. And he's going to be hard to wrestle. We saw that in the Tsarukyan fight where he almost had it beat. I mean, he looked okay against Tsarukyan. I thought he looked good. He wobbled him. I mean, he even worked the ground game. But for me, my thoughts with this fight is this. We're going to get 3 results here. There are 3 options. One is Clay gets absolutely clocked in the face and goes out and Silva wins by KO. Don't think it's going to happen. I mean, Clay has gotten knocked out a couple times. I think that option 2 is more likely because Clay does this a lot. Even though Neto BJJ himself is not one to get a submission in the UFC, it's not really his style according to his record. But I think Clay loves throwing his neck in the way and getting submitted. He is just so susceptible to that. Where he just kind of throws his neck out there, and then somebody, if you're good, you will find it with Clay. So that's option number 2, where Clay either gets hit and then he gets submitted. Option 3 is Clay works his magic. He gets a finish himself. Silva's got 4 UFC losses. 3 are by knockout and 1 by decision. I mean, Neto BJJ has no submissions to his record. Who's to say that Clay can't add a submission to his record in the loss column, right? So I'm going to go under 2.5 here for -145. And that's the play that I'm parlaying with Melk Costa, actually. So Melk Costa, I got a -230. And if you parlay that -145 and the -230 together, you get +140 odds. And I'm going to lay a whole unit on that. I absolutely love the under here because I think there's a myriad of results where we can find somebody getting put out, somebody falling asleep. And ultimately, I agree with you. This could be the one that Clay ends up retiring in. Oh, sorry. Before I let you go, I want to hear your thoughts too. I didn't do Mr. Neto BJJ his justice. He did submit Neil Magny in a grappling contest in 2021. So sorry about that. My bad. Go ahead with what you think is going to happen in this one.
That was the point that I was going to lead off with. Joaquim Silva, I mean, he has no submissions in the UFC, but I mean, we do know that he's good at it. We do know that he's got it in the arsenal. And we do know, as you mentioned, that Clay Guida loves to shoot for doubles. And he loves to get his head caught in there. He's gotten guillotined, I think, 4 or 5 times in the UFC, which I know obviously sounds like a ton. He's got 36 fights, 17 losses, but of those 17 losses, 5 are to guillotine. And he's been rear naked choked a number of times. He's obviously been knocked out. So there's definitely the avenue where he just throws his neck in there. He gets cracked maybe, and then shoots for a takedown and gets guillotined real quick, falls right into a guillotine. Wouldn't surprise me. But I think that the intangibles are the difference for me. Clay Guida is a dog. He's a dog. He's not as durable these days, and he could definitely just die to Silva and retire. But if he survives that first round, I think he's just going to run Silva ragged until he's exhausted. And then just eventually beats him until Silva submits. And to your point, I like that under 2.5 for that reason. Clay Guida fights at 110% the entire time. And I think that that's going to breed either a finish on his own sword. He's either going to fall on his own sword or he's going to be able to finish Silva early. So I've got Guida for a half unit, just straight up, +270. That's actually moved down to +250 today. So I'll lock it in officially for +250. But then I'll take Silva by sub for a quarter unit at +300. So I think that if Silva wins, it could very likely be a sub. And so that would at least net me a quarter unit. If Guida wins, that would net me a full unit. So that's where I'm going on this fight. So Guida for a half unit, Silva by sub for a quarter unit. And Andy, you're going, remind me.
I'm going to pick Silva to win this one as my pick. But under 2.5 on this fight at -145, parlayed with Melk Costa at -230 for a parlay that comes out to +140 is my bet on this one. Rick's going with Guida on the value and the pick. I'm going with Silva as my pick, but under as my bet. Rick is probably going to make me use some of my free bets on Clay Guida when we are together this weekend. Can't wait. Stay locked in with us as we continue on in the middleweight division with Punahele Soriano taking on Dustin Stoltzfus. Hey, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to Pilsners and Prelims, a UFC betting podcast by Happy Hour Sports. Just want to ask if you could like and subscribe to the video if you like the content that we're putting out. And be sure to stay tuned to what we have coming up in the future. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you on the other side. Coming up next in the middleweight division, we have Punahele Soriano taking on Dustin Stoltzfus. Soriano trains out of Extreme Couture, which is one of the hottest gyms in America right now. I mean, you've got the Sean Strickland story, you've got the Francis Ngannou story. You've got a lot of, I mean, I could go through the whole list here. There's a lot of other really solid dudes that are training in Extreme Couture right now. Soriano started off at 2-0 after his Dana White Contender Series in 2019. He's 1-3 since, but the guys that he has taken losses to are Brendan Allen, Nick Maximov, and Roman Hopalov. So for me, I do feel like Soriano has that striking advantage over Stoltzfus. He's not going to quit like Stoltzfus. Stoltzfus is a decent striker, black belt in BJJ. So cheers to that. We'll see if that's a legit BJJ black belt or not. It seems like, as the Khabib boys joke about, the BJJ black belts are handed out like candy nowadays, which is unfortunate, but I feel like Stoltzfus could be a beneficiary of that. I'm not sure. I don't want to roast his black belt by any means, but anywho, he was very hyped up after his Dana White Contender Series victory. And he beat Dana White's guy, Rick. He beat Joe Pyfer. And that was Joe Pyfer's one loss in Dana White Contender Series before we got the be like Joe Pyfer. And now Joe Pyfer's got a main event in February. So cheers to Joe. But Dustin has not had the same luck. He beat Joe Pyfer, and then he's been 1-4 in the UFC since. The guy does not like getting hit. He's slow on the feet. He's got a terrible gas tank. And he's got the speed disadvantage versus Soriano. So I'm interested to see if you agree with me. I know you and I are both really not huge Stoltzfus guys. We've gotten burned on him before, and we've also profited fading him in the past. So off record, not on the podcast. What do you think?
Yeah, I've been on both sides of Stoltzfus, like you said. I mean, I've lost on Stoltzfus backing him, believing in his ability to mix it all up together, use the octagon control, use that grappling. He's not the heaviest-handed striker. Now he can deal some damage, but it's slow, like you said. Like he's slow on the feet, and that's where I think that this fight could really get him in trouble. Soriano's defensive grappling is not great. His offensive wrestling is good. He's a D3 All-American. And he doesn't really use that offensive wrestling much because he's really fallen in love with his hooks. He's got power, and this fight reminds me of the fight that he had against Dalcha Lungambula, who, poor Dalcha Lungambula, has gotten knocked out by, I think, 2 or 3 of the fighters on this card. Puna Soriano, as well as Cody Brundage, knocked him out. But where Soriano has struggled, though, is against the more technical strikers. And that's not what Stoltzfus is. Stoltzfus, when he tries, he stands flat-footed, and to close the distance, he likes to lean forward, likes to lunge in, and then lead with his head. And against a guy like Soriano, he's going to take your head clean off the center line. And if it doesn't happen, I'd be shocked. But this feels like a matchup nightmare for Stoltzfus. His durability has been in question for a long time. And against a guy who's going to sit down and strikes like Soriano, I really don't see an area where he'll be able to be effective enough to win the fight at minimum. If he tries to grapple, Soriano's got decent grappling, especially once he gets to the mat as well. He's got a couple submissions to his name himself. But I think that Stoltzfus is going to get into just a few car crash or 50-50 engagements, and that's going to be enough to put the lights out. So I've got Soriano. His UFC record isn't sexy, as you mentioned. The losses to Maximov and Brendan Allen, well, you're facing good wrestlers there. Against Kopylov, you're facing a very technical striker at range. Okay, well, Stoltzfus isn't really either. Stoltzfus can be a decent wrestler, but he's not as good as Maximov or Allen, and he's not as good on the feet as Allen or Kopylov. So a little bit of MMA math there, but I think that Soriano is able to get this done pretty confidently, and I think the odds reflect that. So I've got Soriano inside the distance at -125. I've got a full unit on that. But yeah, Andy, where do you lie?
I'm going a similar route here, but potentially more lucrative if it hits. I'm going to go with Puna round 2 plus 475 at a quarter of a unit, and I'm going to go Puna round 3 at plus 825 for a quarter of a unit as well. Found both of those on Bet Online. My method there to the madness is that I do think that Stoltzfus can make this a fight in the first round. I really do. I think that Stoltzfus and Soriano could have a really solid first round back and forth. But the gas tank is where the difference is going to be made here. As long as things go according to plan in round 1, Soriano is going to take care of business in round 2 or round 3. I think you're inside the distance bet is not going to hit in the first round because I think Stoltzfus can at least weather the storm in the first 5 minutes. But time and time again, we've seen this guy continue to gas out. We've seen that he doesn't like to get hit. And Soriano is going to be able to piece this guy up and make his life miserable, as Extreme Couture guys do. They love making their opponents' lives miserable. So I'm going with those. I feel like either of those angles are super lucrative, and you're not really risking a ton. Like, total risk here is only half a unit for potentially a full unit payout or full 2-unit payout. So I'm all in on the unique angle here. You're going with the full inside the distance on Punahele. It sounds like we are both taking Soriano. So keep it locked in with us as we get into the final 4 fights of this card. UFC Austin is in for a treat, man. This main event and main card is so fucking good on the final 4 fights of the night. We've got Sean Brady taking on Kelvin Gastelum to start that gauntlet of 4 awesome fights here in the welterweight division. Keep it locked in with us as we continue on previewing UFC Austin. Coming up next in the welterweight division, we have Sean Brady taking on Kelvin Gastelum. Gastelum was moving back down to welterweight. So he's went back and forth between middleweight and welterweight from his time when he got into the UFC from The Ultimate Fighter, which is where a lot of you guys know him from, Ultimate Fighter 17, and moved down to welterweight. A lot of weight miss, a lot of weight issues with him, including him just completely missing the scale, not even making it to the scale to weigh in, led to him moving up to middleweight. And now he's back down. I mean, lots of success in middleweight too, right? I mean, he made it all the way up to fighting Izzy for the belt, which is one of the greatest middleweight fights in the history of the promotion, honestly. A very, very entertaining fight, great bout. And it's been a mixed bag for him since then, where it seems like Gastelum, he took some time off, he took some time to figure things out. He still seems to be figuring things out, in my opinion, where I think this is going to be an interesting barometer for him. And the big red flag I'm going to put up is the weight. So I'm sure you'll talk about the weight a bit too when you talk about him. But for Gastelum, he's fighting out of the Fight Ready camp. So he fights with alongside Henry Cejudo, who runs that Fight Ready camp, as well as Davison Figueiredo, who fights right after this. Can't wait to preview that one. Gastelum has been in the UFC for almost a decade. It doesn't feel that way. He's got high fight mileage, and that paired with him cutting down to 170 is the real red flags for me. I think Sean Brady is fantastic at one main thing, and that's getting his opponents down with some stellar grappling, some stellar wrestling, and then he's going to put you into striking positions you don't want to be in, where he's going to be ground and pound the hell out of you. And that's where Gastelum is iffy for me. I feel like Gastelum has struggled against the wrestling of Neil Magny and Robert Whittaker in the past, where Sean Brady's got that Renzo Gracie background. He's got a lot of different people that have fed into his style and fed into his camp. And Sean was due back a lot earlier, but he has had 2 canceled bouts due to injury, infections, whatever it may be. And with that full year off now, I feel like he is fully ready to take on this Kelvin Gastelum challenge, where there's just too many question marks surrounding Kelvin Gastelum heading into this one, as well as Sean Brady. I get the whole Bilal Muhammad piece where Bilal Muhammad knocked him out, but I don't know, man. I really like Sean in this one. What do you think?
Yeah, so we're on opposite sides of this one. There's definitely an avenue to victory for Brady. I mean, he's the favorite, and I mean, you summarized his game very well. Relentless wrestling. He's not too impressive on the feet, but he's continued to improve there. Like, he got outstruck by Michael Chiesa, which is not a good look by any means. And then he got finished by Bilal Muhammad, which is also not a good look. But both of those guys were able to keep it on the feet long enough to where they were able to test Brady on the feet and really force him to be a striker, which is not where his bread gets buttered. And so if Gastelum can do the same thing, I imagine that Gastelum will have a lot of success because he's a better striker than Michael Chiesa. I would argue better than Bilal because Bilal just doesn't have power behind his fists, but neither does Brady. Brady's issue on the feet is really that he doesn't have power. The striking has gotten a lot more crisp. And against Bilal, he was able to crack Bilal. I say crack. He was able to hit Bilal clean, flush, with multiple different strikes. Bilal never was phased, and that's sort of the point, is that Bilal's been hit in the past and wobbled. He was never really in trouble at all, ever in that fight. He was able just to press Brady until Brady just couldn't take it anymore. Like, it was just too fast of a pace for him, where Bilal was just on the front foot, pissed about all the shit talk that Brady had, where it was a problem. And that's where I could see Gastelum having success. because on the feet, Gastelum is as fast as anybody with his boxing. I mean, it is as crisp a 1-2 punch as you'll see in the UFC. I mean, it is pow pow, like just 1-2 down the pipe, and it'll land clean. And if he does that, I don't think it'll take many for him to rock Brady or force Brady to be a very obvious grappler. And that's where, if it gets obvious, I mean, you mentioned his wrestling wasn't great against Neil Magny or I'm blanking on the other fighter, Robert Whittaker, but in general, it's been solid. Now, in general, solid wrestling does not really see much success against Sean Brady. So it'll be interesting. And that's where the X factor lies throughout this career or throughout this fight. But I think that Gastelum's going to be able to have a lot of success on the feet. He's going to be the bigger fighter in this fight. That weight cut, whether he makes weight or not, so long as this fight happens, he'll be the much bigger fighter, and he's light on his feet. The weight cut for him isn't an issue of, well, he's sick or he's injured or there's an issue. It's just he struggles to make that weight. He just does. And so we'll see if he does. He looks good. He's posted a couple of pictures where he looks good and thin, but we'll see. He's typically the smaller fighter fighting at 185. He has the chance now to be the much bigger fighter and see a lot more success because he struggled at 185. He didn't have that advantage. And as we've seen through that loss streak of Adesanya, Till, Hermanson, Whittaker, Cannonier, that really hurt him. And he fought a lot of really good strikers in that time. So it'll be interesting. Calf kicks could be interesting, but he doesn't want to get taken down. But really, I think that Gastelum's reinvented himself, and he's here for a second stint in the UFC, like a second run towards the top. He's only 32. He looked good in that Curtis fight, which was a close fight, but Curtis is good as well. I'm not a fan of Curtis, as are many. Many aren't fans of Curtis because of all his antics, but I've got to respect him at this point. He's putting up very good fights with top-level opposition. So I've got Gastelum. I think this is an incredible fight. And you've got Sean Brady, right? I've got Gastelum for a full unit at plus 115. You've got Brady. Are you putting anything on this fight?
Yeah, I'm going Brady for the full unit too. So maybe we just take a gentleman's bet on this one. But
you probably should kill the bookie juice. As you like.
Yeah, kill the bookie juice. Although I do have, depending on where we do it, I would have the edge taking that bet. Both of us are taking a side on this one. I'm going Sean Brady. Rick is going with Kelvin Gastelum. And that's going to be a potential fight of the night, if I have to be honest. But keeping it moving here, we have the former flyweight champion, Deiveson Figueiredo, taking on Rob Font, Boston's own. Keep it locked in with us as we continue on with this bantamweight bout.
And coming up in our third to final fight, we've got Rob Font facing former flyweight champion Deiveson Figueiredo up to bantamweight. Bantamweight, right? I'm not sure, but yeah, bantamweight. To face the boxer Rob Font, as mentioned. And this should be another very, very interesting fight. It feels like Deiveson Figueiredo is finally able to breathe after just being consumed with those fights against Brandon Moreno for the greater part of 3-4 years. So it feels like fresh air for him. It was always bewildering how he was able to make 125 in the first place. And so 135 feels like it's going to be more natural for him. And he's facing a guy in Font who we know pretty well. Got a good gas tank. He's going to press on the pace the entire time with that boxing. And he's got one of the more crisp just boxing combinations throughout the league. And so it'll be interesting to see who's got the better edge on the feet as far as power and damage goes. I lean Figueiredo. I think that power holds up a weight class here because he is pretty much a natural 135er already. And that power at 125 was just a complete difference maker, like Amanda Nunes level power, but at that division. And so power as far as the differential between them and everybody else. And so I think it's going to be interesting. He obviously has the wrestling, the grappling. He's just a born finisher. And so it'll be interesting to see if he's able to damage Font, who's been able to wear some damage in the past. So Font coming in off the back of another loss to Corey Sandhagen, which respectable, but what we saw in that fight, first round, taken down, second round, taken down, third round, taken down, fourth round, taken down, fifth round, taken down. He was on the ground for something like 20-something minutes in that fight. And he was held there the entire fight by Corey Sandhagen. And granted, Corey had an elbow injury that he claims he had at least. So whether that was accurate or not, he was able to wrestle the shit out of Rob Font. What tells me that Figueiredo won't be able to? What tells me that Figueiredo, even if he gets clipped, won't be able to leverage his wrestling? He's as good as anybody on the feet, but also on the mat. And that, to me alone, makes me side with Figueiredo. So I think it's fascinating that he's the underdog here. But, Andy, where do you lean in this fight? I think this is a weird line for this.
I'm right there with you, man. I cannot believe Figueiredo is an underdog. I don't know if it's him moving up the weight class. Maybe it's the time off. But, I mean, the last time he fought was beginning of this year. Like, I know he was supposed to have that Manel Cop bout, but he's been saying that he was going to do this for a minute, and he's finally doing it. I'm happy for him that he gets to move up and see what bantamweight is like. I think Rob Font is literally just a perfect stepping stone for him to be able to then propel himself to get into these interesting bantamweight conversations, because besides the controversial bantamweight title fight that's coming up, where should Chito Vera get a title shot? No, but because Sean O'Malley is dictating who gets it, he's getting it. There are so many dudes who deserve a bantamweight title shot that Deiveson Figueiredo beats Rob Font here, and he gets that shot. And I think that's what the UFC is doing here. Because does the UFC want Rob Font to get a title shot? I think Rob Font's an awesome dude. I think he's a phenomenal fighter, but I don't think that Rob Font is as big of a name and as huge a proponent in the bantamweight division as Deiveson Figueiredo coming in from the flyweight, and he's getting this guy. I'm with the gas tank for Font will be a factor. Figueiredo also has a huge gas tank though. Like, that guy was going into wars with Moreno. He did get choked out by Moreno in their second fight, and then they had the doctor stoppage, which whatever. I don't see an avenue where this happens with Font, where he's going to be able to submit Figueiredo. I think Figueiredo is equally as good with him on the feet, if not better. And there's just no angles for me where I see that Figueiredo is should be the dog here. So I love value like this, man. I really do. And this is one that I've had circled for a while, ever since I saw that he got rescheduled and was able to fight Rob Font. I'm going on a bit about it, but I just can't express how excited I am for this fight, to be honest with you. So totally agree with everything you said. I don't have a ton to add from the stylistic standpoint, besides that I just don't see where Font has that edge.
Yeah, the only edge that I could see Font having is if Figueiredo's power just doesn't translate, or that 3-inch reach advantage in the boxing is able to land before Figueiredo can get there. And that could be the difference. But I think an interesting note is also that Rob Font in his last 10 fights, he's 6-4. But in those fights, he has been between a -150 favorite to a +150 dog. So basically anywhere around a pick 'em in 9 of 10 of those fights. And that includes fights against Rafael Sunsao, Sergio Pettis, Marlon Moraes, Cody Garbrandt, Jose Aldo, Marlon Vera. So against high-level competition, like, he's able to keep fights close regardless, or at least able to give a stylistic matchup to where it's like, hey, I'm not going to get out of there easy. You're not going to be able to get out easy. The only person who's really able to do it and dominate him the entire fight was Corey Sandhagen. So maybe he's found the path of least resistance to Rob Font. And if he did that and he really showed the blueprint, Figueiredo has more than enough wrestling and jiu-jitsu to be able to hold the back on Rob Font. If he can do it to Brandon Moreno, I guarantee he's going to be able to do it to Rob Font. So,
the other thing with me here too is, like, even if you want to go the MMA Fight Miles approach or like the UFC experience approach, like, both these guys started their careers, Rob Font in 2011 professionally, Deiveson Figueiredo in 2012 professionally. They both then Figueiredo started in the UFC in 2017, Rob Font in 2014. Like, both guys have about the same number of UFC fights. With Figueiredo, he's got 14 UFC bouts. Rob Font's got 16. It's like, from a UFC mileage standpoint, they both are running on the same pace. Besides that, Deiveson Figueiredo has a ton of championship experience in 5-round fights compared to Rob Font's. But, like, I mean, Deiveson's 35, Rob Font's 36. I don't see an age, an experience, a mileage standpoint here at all. It's just so confusing to me that the odds are here, and I think it's time that we pounce on it. So,
and I think,
how many units are you riding with on Figgy?
Yeah, sorry to cut you off there a little bit. I mean, Figueiredo too. I mean, he has more fights, more championship fights, but he has far more finishes. He's got a lot of first round, second round finishes. So, like, fight time-wise, Rob Font's gotten to a lot of decisions. Figueiredo's been sitting there and getting guys out early before he takes much damage and gets more mileage on his body. Rob Font, he's a boxer, so he's taking a lot of 4-ounce gloves to the body, to the head, everywhere. So it could be interesting. And that's not to say that Rob Font isn't durable, because we've seen Rob Font get wobbled a lot. You don't really see Rob Font get knocked out. It doesn't really happen. To be fair, it hasn't happened. So I doubt Figueiredo will be able to get that. I think Figueiredo could get the back and choke him out, though. But I'm just going to take Figueiredo straight up. I got him at plus 125 for 2 units. That's my favorite play of the week. And I think it's my biggest play so far on the podcast. So I love Figueiredo in this spot. I'd be surprised if the power doesn't translate.
I'm with you. And I'm also going 2 units on this one as well, where I can't, I'm being a dead horse now, but I can't believe that the odds are here. So we're both on Figueiredo big in this one. We're both going with Figueiredo for 2 units at plus 125. Coming up next, we have Jamey-Lyn Turner stepping in last minute. Well, not last minute compared to some of the other ones we previewed over the last few weeks, but last minute as in he stepped in last week to take on Bobby Green in the lightweight division. Keep it locked in with us as we preview the co-main event. And in the UFC Austin co-main event, we have Jamey-Lyn Turner stepping in to take on Bobby Green in the lightweight division. Jamey-Lyn Turner just accepted this fight last week. Bobby Green threw down the gauntlet after his last opponent bailed out on him and said, hey, who in the lightweight division can take on me? Mean King Bobby Green. And Jamey-Lyn Turner said, fuck it, I'll do it. Jamey-Lyn Turner's on a 2-fight skid. Why not do it? Bobby Green is going to get you a ton of publicity. He's going to get you a ton of views because people love watching Bobby Green fights. But Rick, people also love watching Jamey-Lyn Turner fights. This guy is a freak. He is 6'3" and cuts down to 155 pounds. And I'll let you kind of deep dive what this means tactically for this fight. But that's like, I like Green here. I like Turner here. Jesus. Turner, the concern for me is that he's cutting this much weight in such a short time. If there was a bet on if he can make weight or not, I would bet that he's going to miss weight. And I think the fight's still going to happen, but that's just a concern for me that I don't think he's going to be able to cut all the weight in time, where he was joking about it on, I forget what podcast it was, but essentially both the hosts were like, dude, you're not going to make weight. And he was just kind of sitting there smiling. It's like, I don't know what's going to happen there. And at least for this weight miss, if he does miss, it's not a health concern. It's a short-term thing for me. So that doesn't really fit into my weight miss fade. I'm interested to see what you think about this bout, though, because all in all, this is going to be really entertaining. But I do feel that Jamey-Lyn Turner is much, much more skilled than Bobby Green, to where I was surprised to see the odds. I think the odds are a weight and a timing factor.
Yeah, I don't think that he's going to make weight. I don't think that he's really going to try to make weight. Like, I think he's going to give it like the old tough try. There's a phrase for that. The old college try. Yeah, the old college try. Thank you. He's going to give it the old college try just to save face and save face towards the UFC, USADA and stuff. I guess not USADA anymore.
Screw him.
But he didn't make weight against Dan Hooker, who Bobby Green was supposed to fight in this fight before Dan Hooker had to fall out. But that fight against Dan Hooker was very interesting. He lost by split decision, and I had him winning that fight, but it really came down to that second round. And in that second round, he almost broke Hooker. He nearly finished him. He had him bloodied or buried pretty much. But Dan Hooker survived because Dan Hooker has that dog in him, as we've seen throughout his career against Poirier and everybody else. He's just a dog, dude. He just loves to fight, despite the blonde hair that he's trying to be like Charles, even though he's Australian. Whatever. No, Derek, we don't need a Dan Hooker slander on this one. He's already out because he's injured. But Dan Hooker then gave it back to him. And he exhausted Turner. Turner on the stool between rounds 2 and 3 looked like he was broken. Now he went out there and fought. He gave it his all. He wasn't broken, and we saw that dog in Turner as well. But that was an interesting moment in Turner's career where he's now lost his last 2 fights by split decision to Mateusz Gamrot and Dan Hooker, which happens. Those are 2 damn good fighters. And before that, he was finishing everybody with ease. Brock Weaver, Uris Medic, Jamie Malarkey, Brad Waddell. Not top tier names, but respectable names nonetheless. But it's like you said, it's that length, and that's going to be the difference against Green, more so than usual for Green. Because I mean, Green is so unique in that he keeps his hands behind, or can't speak. He's unique in that he keeps his hands low. He keeps them by his side, and he strikes from the hip, so you really can't see where he's striking from. And then to defend, he might bring them up, but he typically just rolls the shoulder and rolls with the punches. Against a guy in Turner who is going to rip your body with leg kicks, that doesn't really work. And Turner can also throw punches right off of that, and he does so consistently. Not only does he do that, but he's got counter hooks, and he's able to step away while landing them as well. So it's hard to really get rhythm against Turner, just as hard as it's hard to get rhythm against Green. And if we get into that stalemate where both guys are just standing across from each other and fight and just like trying to land at range, well, I'll take the guy who's 6'3" with a 5-inch reach advantage over Bobby Green. So it's odd in that sense, and the odds themselves are a little particular to me as well, because I know Turner's taking it on short notice, and his cardio didn't look great against Dan Hooker, but that Dan Hooker fight was also as intense as it gets. And Turner was minus 250. Now he's minus 225. And I think that's even getting smaller. So people are really valuing the fact that Green had a camp and that Green was fighting or was training for a 5-round fight, not a 3-round fight. So they think that he's going to have that distinct cardio advantage. But 3-round fights really favor Jamey-Lyn Turner. I mean, he is a go for broke type of guy who's going to try and go for finishes. And I think that he's likely able to get it here, or he gasses himself out and Bobby Green is able to hit something clean like he was against Grant Dawson his last fight, where by surprise he knocked him out in 30 seconds. So I've got this fight pick-wise, I've got Turner to win the fight. I think the range is the difference. I sort of just laid out all the different reasons. But my official bet is the fight not to go the distance at minus 140. I think Turner is either able to find the finish, or the cardio and weight miss by Turner ends up breeding him exhausting himself, and Bobby Green just putting the pace on him until someone's got to stop it. So should be an interesting fight. There's a lot up in the air given the short notice and given the matchup differences between these two. But where are you going with your pick and your bet, Andy?
Yeah, so this one is an interesting one for me. I am going to pick Jamey-Lyn Turner to win, and I am going to go cross sport similar to how I did in our last preview. I'm going to be parlaying Jamey-Lyn Turner with Chargers money line as they travel to see the New England Patriots this weekend on Sunday. Again, I can talk more about the NFL matchup and some of our NFL content, which you can check out at happyhoursports.net. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can see some of that stuff too with DJ's podcast, Sharpen the Public. With Jamey-Lyn Turner, I gave my kind of voice there. Turner, in my opinion, is going to beat him up in the striking. He is going to also be like, I don't think Green's necessarily going to try to take it to the feet. I think this is going to be all-out war on the feet. And with that, Turner's going to have the reach advantage. He's going to have the height advantage. He's going to have the strength advantage over Bobby Green. The risk is just the weight. But with last time, the weight cut, I believe, was it felt like he was really trying. And that's why we saw him so low on energy. So like just leached and sapped out of all the energy and health in his body. He's got nothing to lose in this one unless he's weighing in like 20 pounds over. Oh, I exaggerate. Unless he's weighing in like 5 pounds over. I think that he will get it there. Like you said, he'll give it the old college try, and he's going to be healthy about doing it on a short notice. So I really like him to win this one, and we'll be parlaying it with the Chargers at minus 275, which brings you to even odds, actually, believe it or not. So I'm going with a full unit on that parlay of Chargers and Jamey-Lyn Turner. And that's our co-main preview. We're both going with Jamey-Lyn here. I love the man. It's really cool that he's got a bunch of pet tarantulas. Definitely look that up if you are interested and think that's as funny as I do. We've got the main event coming up in UFC Austin. Beneil Dariush taking on Arman Tsarukyan. So stay tuned with us as we preview this final fight of the card.
Finally, to the main event, we've got Beneil Dariush up against one of my favorite fighters, Arman Tsarukyan. To be fair, Beneil is one of my more respected fighters, not one of my favorite, but I think everyone's sort of in that same camp there, where hard for him to be your favorite fighter, but you have to respect Beneil Dariush and what he's been able to do across his UFC career. Now 22-5-1. 16-5-1 in his UFC career. Arman Tsarukyan, much the same, 20-3, 7-2 in his UFC career. A lot more brief, but with Tsarukyan, it comes down to the pace that he puts on guys and the level of wrestling and grappling that he's able to force his will upon his opponents. And that's what it comes down to. He's able to ragdoll opponents. He ragged Damir Ismagulov down the entire fight. He couldn't keep him down necessarily for much of the fight, but he was able just to really take the fight wherever he wanted to be, and then just win it throughout time. So, and that was again last December. So we'll see how he's elevated his game over the past few years, or over the past year. But him on the feet is a work in progress, very much so. Doesn't have many knockouts to his name. The ones that he does have were mainly earlier in his career. He's got one in the UFC against Christos Giagos, which not the highest level opponent can happen. The others largely came on the ground, but he does have one head kick against Philippe Olivieri back in 2018 in Plotforma Cup 2018. Not familiar with the competition, but not a UFC level opponent for sure. Lost his UFC debut against Islam Makhachev, which happens to the best of us. And his only other loss was to our good friend and his good friend, Spider-Man meme looking at each other, Mateusz Gamrot. And that's where this fight, I see a bit of an edge for Dariush. Tsarukyan lost to Gamrot. Beneil Dariush beat Gamrot. That does not mean that Beneil Dariush is going to beat Tsarukyan. MMA math will tell you so. I might want it to be so. And I might think it will be so, but that is not why it would be so. But there are a lot of commonalities, jokes aside, between Gamrot and Tsarukyan that I think Beneil Dariush is going to be able to see success in this fight. Both Gamrot and Tsarukyan, which if you haven't watched that fight, go back and watch that fight because that is grappling to the highest order. Those two just went at it, and when they weren't grappling, they were striking and wobbling each other. It was a fantastic fight. But Dariush in that fight against Gamrot showed just how elite his grappling defense is. Gamrot relentlessly tried to take Dariush down the entire fight and never landed one. He was 0 for 5 with his takedowns, and 5 doesn't sound like a lot. It was a lot more than that. They weren't official attempts, but they were just interchanging, scrambling on the ground. And at no point did Gamrot have a dominant position. I don't see a way where Tsarukyan is able to notch that against Dariush. And Tsarukyan striking on the feet, it isn't clean. It's very rough. He's continuing to improve it. And he's got, he obviously has a number of knockout wins, but it's not refined. And Dariush is a veteran. He's fought against some of the biggest guys in the weight class. And he's gotten knocked out. His chin has been checked before. Every UFC loss is by finish, whether by submission or knockout. But his striking continues to improve, and his calf kicks and knees to the body were fantastic against Gamrot. And he times those knees when guys are coming in for takedowns brilliantly. And we've seen Tsarukyan wobbled in multiple fights now to the point where any of those knees, any of those kicks that Dariush is able to read, he could knock out Tsarukyan. And so when I think, before I hand it over to you, Andy, I know I've gone on for a minute here now.
No, you're good.
But what I think is very interesting as well is that Dariush against Gamrot was plus 225. Dariush right now against Tsarukyan is plus 235. We've got very similar opponents, very similar odds, and we saw the success he got against him. Gamrot and Tsarukyan are not the exact same fighter. They fight very similar stylistically, but I see a very similar path to victory for Dariush, and that's just defending the takedowns and getting damage on the in-betweens. So where do you see the fight?
I just do not think that Las Vegas has ever respected Beneil Dariush like MMA fans do. And the odds reflect it, right? Where there's been so many times where Beneil Dariush has been an underdog, a big underdog, a moderate underdog like he is now. Just so many occasions where you look at the odds and you're like, how is Dariush that big of a dog? And then he goes into the Oliveira fight and he's favored and he loses. So it's like as soon as you expect him to pull it off, he does not. But I think Oliveira, an equally disrespected guy, to be fair. The story with Tsarukyan, I think you hit it on the head. I think the only thing I would add with the Islam piece, he took Islam down in his UFC debut, which is an awesome little accolade to have. You can hang the banner for that one. With Benny, I think that you are going to get that durability. I think you are going to get that gas tank against Tsarukyan. Tsarukyan, I was not overly impressed in his last fight against Silva a few months ago. To be honest with you, I really wasn't just like, wow, this is an incredible outing by him. Every time that Tsarukyan has gone up against somebody that is top tier, Islam, Gamrot, he did beat Aubin Mercier, who two-time PFL champion now. Shout out to him in 2019. But the rest of his resume is just like, it's okay. Like, I'm not huge on it. Where Benny, we know what you're gonna get with him. There's so many ways for him to win this fight, and I think a lot of it is going to just be a well-paced, calculated fight that we see and know and love Benny for as MMA fans. And that's why I just feel like this is such good value that we're getting on Beneil Dariush at plus 235. MMA math aside, like, I really do think that we're going to just get that clean, calculated, well thought out approach that he's going to be able to use against Tsarukyan, but wasn't necessarily able to exploit against Charles Oliveira, because Charles is so much more random and has so many more aces up his sleeve compared to Tsarukyan. Where Tsarukyan, I just feel like you know what you're going to get. We've seen him fight in the UFC now 9 times. You know what you're going to get with him. He doesn't have an ace up his sleeve. Beneil Dariush can weather the storm here. The odds should not be this far apart for someone who is such a large veteran like Dariush. He knows the game. He loves the game. I love Dariush in this spot at plus 235.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I mean, I've got a full unit on him at plus 235, and I think it's that BJJ black belt, which I know a lot of guys have black belts to stay, so it's watered down, but he's a true black belt, like one of those that you could respect. But he's also a no-gi world champion, and he uses leg locks from the bottom to flip opponents, and he did so against Gamrot the entire fight. Even when he gets taken down, is in a bad spot, he grabs onto that leg, and he's able to be able to get it under him. It's fascinating how he does it, because no real other fighters in the UFC, at least active fighters in the UFC, really do it. But it is so unbelievably effective, and that striking continues to level up. So I think that training with RDA, with Shogun, with Giga, and I don't respect Giga as much as the former two, but I still respect Giga's kickboxing, has really leveled up his striking. And the timing that he showed over the last couple of fights, you can't really ignore the Charles Oliveira fight, but the Ferreira, the Tony Ferguson, the Gamrot fight, you've seen progress from a guy that's 34, is on the best run of his career, and is looking to have another chance at the title. And he's a win against Tsarukyan away from having another number one contenders fight against somebody at the top. Because, I mean, while he got finished by Charles, his stock is still up there. And to your point, he doesn't get the respect that he deserves. And he is as good as anybody. I mean, his timing on defensive strikes and being able to read opponents and live mesh whatever strike to defend whatever's coming at him is top class. So I like Dariush to win this fight, not comfortably, because Tsarukyan, he's a wild guy when he goes forward. He's going to go for takedowns, but he's also going to go for spinning back fists, for spinning heel kicks. He's got everything in his arsenal. It's just not as refined and clean. And with Dariush's ability to pick guys when they're a little bit out of sync, I think that he's going to be able to hit Tsarukyan enough times, maybe not wobble him, but definitely to be able to win points. And I don't think he's going to get held down. If he does, not for long. So I've got Dariush.
I've also got Dariush here. We're both going with Dariush for a full unit. And that rounds out our card. That is UFC Austin. We have previewed every single fight on the card. If you missed any of them, be sure to check out our YouTube channel, Happy Hour Sports. And if you liked what you heard or didn't like what you heard and want to give some feedback, leave a comment or throw us a like. Definitely don't throw us a dislike. And if you want to keep up with what we're doing, be sure to subscribe, guys. The subscriptions, the likes, it all helps. Any feedback you have for us, we love it. Appreciate you guys tuning in. We cannot wait to watch this card and watch it alongside you guys on Twitter at Andy HH Sports, at Rick HH Sports. This could be one of the best UFC fight nights of the year on our hands that we have here. So surely I wish we got this type of main card here in Charlotte, but alas, maybe we will next year. Any parting thoughts for you, Rick? I think that's all I got.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm really excited for a lot of the matchups that we have across the prelims and the main card. There's a lot of guys that are either trying to prove themselves, go for one final run towards glory, and Miesha, Tate, Dariush, but also some others like Rob Font, who's been in there for a while, and Davison Figueiredo at a new weight class. So there's storylines across multiple different fights that make this really entertaining. And we've got two other fight card. I was about to say good fight cards, but next fight card isn't the sexiest. So we've got 2 other fight cards to close out the year. One being the card of the year, and the other one being entertaining too, with some good matchups, some good fun matchups. So make sure if you enjoy this, make sure you subscribe and make sure you turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our content moving forward. Because getting in on some of these lines early, as we highlighted throughout this, lines move starting last week, and they're moving right now. So if you can catch some of that value going while it's snowballing in one direction, you can make sure you win a little bit more money, or if you lose, because we all do lose, you lose a little bit less. So looking forward to this card. Looking forward to watching it with you in Green Bay with our good friend Zadafi. And it should be a good time. So excited to see you all next week. And we will see you next Tuesday or Wednesday.
Cheers, brother.
Cheers, everybody.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to Pilsners and Prelims, a UFC betting podcast by Happy Hour Sports. Just want to ask if you could like and subscribe to the video if you like the content that we're putting out, and be sure to stay tuned to what we have coming up in the future. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you on the other side.